Hey, look, it's back to the old style of videos. I'm a white guy in a van. So this one is going to be a little different. This is going to be a character analysis, more or less, of a character I'm currently playing, but specifically through the lens of the 15 fears from the Magnus Archives. If you're a fan of that series or not, I don't know who you are. But for a quick, I guess some spoilers, quick rundown. Magnus Archives is an audio series that ran from 2016 to 2021. It's urban fantasy, horror, tragedy style thing. If you're a fan of SCPs, you right at home with the Magnus Archives. But in the world, in that setting, all paranormal nonsense stems from the 15 fears or 15 entities, sometimes 14, depending on stuff. But all of these fears are kind of described as boiled down, like one sentence descriptions of like primordial fears, not just of mankind, but of life in general. And they basically cover everything, and like everything you could be scared of. Like, for example, a simple one, one of them is the buried, which is usually described as a fear of being buried, being like buried alive, having something cave in on you, being trapped, that kind of thing. But it can also relate to fear of like debt and financial insolvency and that kind of thing. Like just anything you can be buried in, whether physically or metaphorically, ties into that fear. So that's that's how these fears work, or how they can be described. So I guess you can kind of think of this video as like a horror horoscope for a D&D character. I'm not sure if I'm even going to like this video, but it's in my head, so I'm going to make it. So the character in question is my formerly Curse of Strahd character, Senlir. He's a formerly Aasimar, well, still Aasimar, and now he's a weird half-dragon thing, barbarian, follower of the Executioner, follower of the Raven Queen, professional wandering executioner, and now the supplicant, servant of Tiamat also. Story nonsense. Lol anime story. So how did it start, I guess? So he's a character that he's always kind of been alone. He has had, spoilers, a family, but they were recently basically all killed by Dendar the Night Serpent, primordial elder evil, blah blah blah. So I guess instead of like describing how this character relates to all 15 fears, I'm just going to talk about some of the closest fears to him. So first I'll go with the lonely. The fear of being alone forever, being cut off. And that's a pretty simple one. When he was in Curse of Strahd, when he was in Barovia, there was a sequence where he was trapped in the mist, and he had a simulated 80 years in a blizzard alone, where he slowly froze over that 80 years. That's a pretty fucked up experience. It's not even like, you don't really have to really say too much about why that fear digs into him, but it's also because he's slowly, and has always been slowly, losing any connections he makes. Like his family, they slowly die off. Like, one of them doesn't come back from a mission or something they had to do, and they just don't come back from it. Like, okay, well, they died because they follow the goddess of death. So these things happen, and especially, he's also of the mind that anything that happens is what's supposed to happen. So he's a little detached from, I guess, consequence in that way. But relating to the fear of the lonely specifically is mostly that he's slowly losing everyone, and there's nothing he can do about it. And he's this incredibly strong, like borderline chosen one. That's not exactly how he sees himself, but he does see himself as one of the most capable beings around, at least to fill his exact role in what he has to do. So no one can really compete with him in that way and do what he has to do. So everyone naturally is going to fall by the wayside sooner or later. Another fear is the hunt, which usually is described as the fear of being prey, but it's also the fear of your pack betraying you, those closest to you betraying you, and you, quote, losing yourself to the hunt or to some goal that, like, you give up everything for. And that's kind of the angle that Sinlir really sees it as. Like, he's going to give up everything and lose everything in the pursuit of Dendar, the elder evil. That, how the hell is he going to kill that? He can't. He's one man. Somebody's passing me already. Ooh. So that also ties, like, that fear in particular ties pretty closely to another fear called the slaughter, which, pretty simple. He does fear losing control and just killing everyone. He's not constantly, but he often does lament over the amount of bodies in his wake, and how many people and things and whatever word you want to use, how much death he's going to participate in going forward, and how much is going to be directly his fault. That is his role. He's an executioner, but it still weighs on him. And that's something he'll never directly admit, that it does weigh on him. But another two more in particular are fears called the vast and the web. Those ones are, the vast is simple. That's the fear. It's almost the opposite of the buried. It's being lost in too much space. But it's also the fear of being insignificant. He fears that he's not going to be, that he has this important destiny, this important role in history to fulfill, and he fears that he won't be able to achieve it, or that it's not possible, that this fate isn't going to work, even though it's been set up by the Raven Queen, by the Goddess of Fate. It's still not going to be enough, and he's not going to be enough. And he fears that. He doesn't fear wide open sky falling forever or being trapped in an endless ocean. He doesn't fear the physical, visceral version of that. It's the metaphysical, the insignificant fate version of that. And then the web is the fear of being manipulated and controlled. And that's one he definitely fears, because his whole life he's been a reactive agent. He's never been proactive. He's always doing things at the whim of others. He makes individual decisions, but only when they come up, only when he reacts to something. So he fears that he's been manipulated by the Raven Queen, by the religious organization he's a part of. He fears he was manipulated by Strahd and by everything that was going on in Barovia, and now he fears being manipulated by both his great enemy, Dendar, the Elder Evil, and by Tiamat, the Mistress of Deception, or whatever fucking title you want to give her. Like, the goddess of trickery. Of course he's going to fear being manipulated by that entity, but he also feels that maybe now that the Raven Queen is being held captive and being devoured by Dendar, maybe he needs Tiamat. And especially if he doesn't fully need Tiamat, maybe escaping her clutches and rebuking her would be worse, because it would drive Tiamat to work with fucking Dendar. Which, who knows if Tiamat would actually do that, but he doesn't know that. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of it. There's a variety of other fears that do tie into it. Like, there's the desolation. That's the fear of burning, losing everything in a more like physical, material kind of sense. You know, everything being burned down, the world being burned down. And I think that's a fear that probably ties closer to a character like Ohm, or maybe Alarin a bit, because Alarin has directly experienced this with the destruction of Waterdeep. Even though it's not something, that wasn't a personal loss, but it was still a loss. The other one, there's one of the fears is called the spiral. This is like the fear of madness and twisting and losing your grip on reality. And this is something like Sendlir fears that ties into that fear insofar as he fears losing himself to death and to the machinations of Tiamat and to his half-dragon instincts and his new self now. He fears losing himself in that way and becoming a twisted version of himself. Not necessarily, he doesn't fear like the madness part, but definitely the twisting of himself. So, yeah, maybe I'll expand on this video, on this concept, and try to analyze some other characters in the, I'll call the Smirkian analysis paradigm. If you've read the Magnus Archives, you'll know what that means. But, yeah, I guess that's it.